Welcome to Resistant Bees. We will inform you here about our work and our experience with disease-resistant bees. Welcome to Resistant Bees. We will inform you here about our work and our experience with disease-resistant bees.
Das nennt sich hygienisches Verhalten oder auch Putztrieb oder VSH genannt. Varroa sensitive.
We'd like to talk about our experience on how our bees defend themselves against the Varroa mite. This is called hygienic behavior.
Ungefähr. Oder wer weiß es nicht? Hygienisches Verhalten. Wer hat sowas schon mal in einem Bienenstock gesehen? Das ist es.
What is hygienic behavior all about? Whoever has seen bolt brood, behavioral VSH, or also compulsive cleanliness in a beehive, it is all the same, and describes how the bee spots actively infected brood cells, opens them, and removes the Varroa mite.
Bedeutet das, dass die Biene aktiv die infizierten Brutzellen feststellt von außen, die verdeckelten Brutzellen, stellt fest, wo die sind, macht die auf und holt die Varroa raus.
The bee, still a larva, will usually be at a stage with red eyes and without color, completely white that is, as you can see here. And then you see how the bee just opens the cells. This is hygienic behavior.
Und noch ohne Farbe, also weiß, sieht man ja hier. Diesen Weiß mit roten Augen.
And if you do a needle test or freeze testing, then it's just to test whether the bees are able to determine if a brood cell is something which is not supposed to be there.
Du machst Nadeltest oder Gefriertest oder das Ganze, was Käfis macht, dann ist es nur auf das hin, ja, dass man also fest.
Varroa mite on the head of the bee larva will be removed and the bee will live on. It will not do her any harm.
Was ist, was nicht stimmt. Die Biene.
You can see it for yourself by simply removing the cover of the cells of such bees, and they will be hatching. However, if the mite happens to be behind the young bee on the back or even on the bottom of the cell, the larva will be eaten out entirely by the bees and the whole cell is cleaned.
Die macht nichts, du kannst es selber probieren, du machst einfach einen Deckel auf von solchen Bienen und die wird zur Welt kommen. Ja? Aber wenn jetzt, wie in der Zelle, ja, wenn jetzt die Varroa...
Like with the drones, on the drones I once observed during a massive reinfection, I think there were about 25 mites in one cell.
Also die Junge wird ganz ausgefressen und die ganze Zelle explodiert.
In my small cells there is normally no Varroa at all. I'll explain why in a moment.
Infizierung gehabt, da waren, weil irgendwann kommt das Foto, da waren glaube ich 25 drin in einer Zelle. Bei mir, in den kleinen Zellen, sind überhaupt keine Varroa. Ja, ich erkläre gleich warum. In dem Fall schon, ja, also in dem Fall...
I have a little movie of my bees. You can see this is a very active colony, as you can see here, because many cells are open. And there will be coming a bee and it pulls out a bee larva. Those are cells where Varroa mites have nested and they are being removed.
Bienenlarve raus. Also das sind alles Zellen, wo Varroa drin sind und die dann rausgeholt werden. Das ist hygienisches Verhalten oder...
This is hygienic behavior, or VSH, or bolt brood. Now she comes.
Da sieht man sie. Seht ihr alle, oder?
As you can see, the bee is pulling it out. Now it comes again as it is taking it out. Now they are pulling it out properly. And like this, the breeding cycle of the Varroa is practically interrupted. It has no longer effect. There is a beekeeper around here, I think his name is called Wallner. Wallner selects the beehives where the Varroa mites are the fattest and where they reach all the way to the bottom. I don't know what the bee exactly does with the Varroa. I'm not sure if the bee bites it now or whether they're just throwing it out. You can see now that it's cleared out. This is the actual topic of the whole presentation. I'll explain why this happens, what it triggers and what it promotes, and while I do that I can explain all sorts of other matters. Therefore, let's remain only in the subject because it's very important, extremely important, to be understood how the bee can protect itself independently against the Varroa mite.
Dass man versteht, wie sich die Biene gegen die Varroa wirklich selbstständig zur Wehr setzen kann.
I found a video online where the hygienic behavior is more visible. Only that this is made by a scientist. By now I'm a bit allergic on scientists. There are many studies speaking against us, and there are no real studies that go deep enough, or let's say, that were done in the right conditions. And I could say they are all just trying to diminish us in a way.
Richtigen Grundvoraussetzungen gemacht worden sind, sondern das sind eigentlich bloß Sachen, uns klein zu machen. Ja?
This man here is a research entomologist, meaning that he researches on insects. He works in California, and I've seen directly on his site here how he prepares thousands of beehives to be brought to the almond blossoms in California.
Und hier werden Tausende von Bienenvölkern vorbereitet, in die Mandelblüte in Kalifornien gebracht zu werden.
There are thousands of bee colonies. All that has nothing to do with us. It's something I want to differentiate very clearly. He examines those that show the hygienic behavior. Although this has nothing to do with us, you can see it in the film how with your own bees, each colony which survives without any treatment will show the hygienic behavior.
Der Stock, jeder Stock bei euch, den ihr überlässt, ohne dass ihr behandelt, wird irgendwann mal das hygienische Verhalten zeigen. Ganz klar.
It will simply appear all by itself, like you can see here. There is a Varroa on the bee. That means the colony is in an absolute state of emergency. It is at its very end, and as you can see here, the brood cell is invaded. It means that the colony is about to perish. But you can see very well how the bee is now taking out. If you see a Varroa on a bee, it means an alarm signal to me. If I see a Varroa on a bee in spite I'm not treating them, it is something that almost never happens. I can see a Varroa here, and that means something is wrong. Now the question is, how does the hygienic behavior appear? What is it triggered by? That is the big question. How long has the Varroa been here for? 30 years? Hasn't there been 30 years of research? How many researches have been made to create a resistance, or better, to induce hygienic behavior? How many have been made? An unbelievable number. There is not a single tangible one which I could say I'd apply it now on my beehives, is there? There isn't. 30 years of research. But why doesn't it exist? There are hives that are supposedly resistant. Why can't it be spread, and why doesn't it work? We've had 30 years to find an answer. And on the other hand, we do have bees now. Where does the Varroa come from? It comes from Asia. Apis cerana. African bees defend themselves much easier against the Varroa. There are also the South American bees, who are also protect themselves much better against the Varroa. Why, and why not our bees? This is actually very obvious. Asian Apis cerana, all African bees, the American bees, they all have far less problems with the Varroa mite than we have now. question is now, what do those bees have in common? Those that fight the Varroa, what do they have in common?
Was haben jetzt die Bienen gemein? Also die sich einfacher gegen die Varroen wehren, was haben die gemein?
I have to add that what I'm going to say now is very simplified. Any scientist could disagree with me now, as I can only speak in a very simplified manner because we can't enter this subject too deeply, as there are different ways the bees have to fight the Varroa. There are beehives where the Varroa simply doesn't propagate, like in the Africanized beehives. Then there are those beehives where the Varroa simply is not being allowed to enter. But for now, I'm only going to talk about the hygienic behavior. Let's have everything else on a side for now.
Was haben jetzt die Bienen gemein?
My last lecture was in autumn in Teruel, a city in the east of Spain. And I have been covering the same aspects. In Spain it is a bit different than here. There are fewer beekeepers, but each has up to 2,000, 3,000 or even 5,000 beehives. And there was a beekeeper in the beekeeping association in Teruel. It has around 100 members, and because everyone had 500, 1,000, 2,000 or even 3,000 beehives, there was quite a potential performance. Not that they were better than anyone else because their general knowledge wasn't overwhelming. They simply make money with their bees. They simply make business and they don't really care too much about what is going on with their bees. But there is somebody who spoke, a biologist, who was employed by the cooperative in Valencia. The beekeepers cooperative in Valencia has around 350 members and altogether 100,000 beehives. They've hired a biologist, Fernando Catalayud, whose job is to find a way out of the misery. In Spain, the situation of the bees is terrifying. According to what he said, it can't get any worse. The Varroa mites are pretty much resistant against all chemicals, excluding Czech mite. Does anyone know Czech mite? Czech mite is the absolute super poison. It is a poison that acts on the neural system, and even on that, there is yet some resistance. And after that, there is nothing. It's over. And the hard chemicals are also being introduced, and they have been introduced over here. Fernando Catalayud has spoken before me, and I was very surprised because in fact he was saying exactly the same as me. On the bottom line he said exactly the same, and now I want to emphasize on a few things he said.
Schauen wir mal jetzt die Bienen an, die verschiedenen. Apicerana, wie lang ist die verdeckelte Brutzeit?
Have a look at this, the various capped breeding periods of the Apicerana. This is the time the bees are enclosed in the capped brood cells. It is 10.9 days with the Apicerana. Fernando Catalayud covered it all here. Where it has been done and who the authors are, Danat Capensis. 11 days, the other African bee, 11.2 days. 11.4 days down here is the Backfast carnica with 12 days. This is the normal calculated enclosed breeding time.
12 Tage ist ja normal, oder? 12 Tage ist normale kalkulierte verdeckelte Brutzeit. Gut, also haben wir schon mal einen Unterschied.
And here we have already a difference. 10.9, let's say about a day less for those bees that protect themselves against the Varroa. Does everyone know how it works with the Varroa? It is clear how the Varroa multiplies. I'll explain it briefly. Here we have a Varroa mite. The Varroa mite is female, right?
Die Varroa ist weiblich.
A Varroa is small. It is about a millimeter or 1.5 millimeters in size, and the very day when the bee brood is being capped, the Varroa slides into the bee brood and hides in the food supply just under the bee larva. The bee lids the cell and then the Varroa is inside, capped.
In der Nahrung schlüpft unter die Made rein, die Bienen verdeckeln die Zelle und dann ist die Varroa in der Zelle drin, verdeckelt.
The mite lays an egg on the first day, that's a male egg. On the second day, the Varroa lays another egg, that's a female egg. And then it goes on and on, laying female eggs, practically from the 9th to the 21st day for 12 days.
Vom 9. bis zum 21. Tag, das sind 12 Tage, legt.
The male mite hatches from the first egg, and then on the next day the female hatches, and they mate.
Und die begatten sich in der Zelle.
And from then on everything depends on the incubation time.
Je länger die Brutdauer ist,
the longer it takes, the more fertile female mites hatch. We can see it here. This is the incubation time for a healthy colony. According to Katalayud, this is all by him. This is the result of the biologist's research that the incubation time is 12 days inside of a capped cell within his colonies. There are practically 2 sexually mature Varroa mites, 2 because of the 12 days.
Ja, dadurch, dass wir 12 Tage haben, wenn wir jetzt
Now let's say we'd extend that time. We have a look at the drones. There is one more there. The drones have 14 to 15 days. It could even be more, as it can multiply by 1 to 4. Therefore the Varroa mites absolutely depend on the breeding time. With 1 day less incubation time, we have far less Varroa mites which can proliferate further. I hope this is clear to everyone.
Sie weiter vermehren können. Ist klar? Klar. Oder hat jemand eine andere Meinung? Oder stimmt irgendwas nicht, was ich sage? Ist klar, oder? Gut. Jetzt sagt
Now Fernando says weak colonies have much longer incubation times. Weak colonies, right? This is the whole point, as the more Varroas, the longer the incubation time, the weaker the colony.
Da kommt der springende Punkt.
And the weaker the colony, the longer the incubation time and even more Varroas.
Ja, also je schwächer der Erfolg wird, passiert genau das Gegenteil, die Varroa vermehrt sie, viel mehr, ja, weil einfach die Brutdauer länger ist. Hier haben wir die
We can see it on the drone brood, as it is also here longer.
Also haben wir jetzt mal
For now we have 2 points. On one side the incubation time, it is much shorter on the African bees and Apis cerana, and much longer on ours.
Eine viel längere Brutdauer.
Now let's have a look at some of the first literature from a Frenchman called François
Der
Huber.
ersten Literaturaufzeichnung von einem François Huber zurück, ein Franzose.
He writes in 1791, before the time when our current type of beekeeping had been practiced, which had only begun towards the end of the 1800s. He writes that the bee needs 19 days from the egg being laid to hatching. 19 days in 1791.
Vom Eiablage bis zum Schlüpfen. 19 Tage. 1791.
That means before the bees would also hatch earlier, right?
Sind auch früher geschlüpft. Ja?
Anyone can read this, it's right here.
Erzählt vom ersten Tag und sagt dann,
He says it's only on the 20th day of its existence, counted from the moment the egg is laid, that it attains a flight state. That is 20 days. If you count to the 20th day, then there are actually only 19 days, as the length of time since the first day of sunshine is counted as 1. The first day counts as 1 already. No day has passed yet. On the 3rd day, 2 days have passed. Accordingly, 19 days will have passed back then. Well, so now we know that formerly the incubation time was shorter. So far to the incubation time. But now an entirely new factor is added, and that's the cell size. Here is a list, and there is something quite interesting. In Europe we have a cell size between 5.1 and 5.5 millimeters, which is used by most of the beekeepers. Why? Because they are giving foundations to the bees engraved with cells featuring a size between 5.1 and 5.5 millimeters.
Warum? Weil wir den Bienen Mittelwände vorgeben, die einfach das Zellenmaß 5,1 bis 5,5 Millimeter aufweisen. Ja, ist doch
And this has been practiced on all artificial foundations for a very long time.
Auffallend ist,
It is striking, though, that the Apis cerana has cell sizes at around 3.6 millimeters. I also can't imagine it as just like a mosquito. Up until 4.9 millimeters. That's the Apis cerana.
Zwischen 3,6 Millimeter, Also ich kann dir das nicht vorstellen. Philippinen 3,6 mm, das ist eine Mücke, ja. Bis 4,9 mm.
Then let's have a look at the African bees. They have cells between 4.6 and 5 millimeters.
Die haben 5,0 bis 4,6. 4,5, 4,5 bis 5,0 mm.
So far they're all smaller than the cells we are using, therefore this is yet another factor where we can see a difference. It doesn't say anything about the quality, but it's simply a difference. Here we see our foundations have 5.4 and the distance is 37. That is the current format everyone or most of us have, 35 and 5.4. There are also foundations of up to 5.7 and even 5.8 millimeters. It all exists. But what does it all have to do with us and the hygienic behavior? Is it possible that in former times our bees have also been building smaller cells? This is the question. Those bees who fight the Varroa build smaller. Ours don't and build bigger. Okay, and this is where it all begins with Ed and Dee Lusby. They had started looking for a way in the 80s, and therefore these people had done absolute pioneering work of exploring all existing beekeeping literature, looking for any annotations on the cell sizes in former times. They went all over the place exploring old annotations of beekeepers and researchers and came to the conclusion that the cells we are using are simply too big. This was their only conclusion in the 80s, and it was the prequel of all this. They were simply looking for a solution to the Varroa and have seen the same I have just laid out. That being that the cell size is simply too big, and then their idea was, let's simply make the cells smaller. Perhaps then we have an opportunity to proceed well against the diseases and the Varroa. And they learned all this by studying the literature. There was a certain Professor Bordeaux in Belgium. He published an article around 1893 stating that the bees ought to be made big, giant bees. Before Bordeaux and Belgian bees were rather small, size between 4.5 and 4.6 millimeters. They had been doing the opposite by shrinking the bees to obtain smaller breeding surfaces and more bees. Then came Bordeaux saying, big bees, more honey, they fly longer and everything is much better. And he was so successful that he managed to convince all foundation producers at the time. And producing foundations had just begun back then. He convinced them to increase the size of the engraved cells on the foundation. It has remained this way until today. Nobody knows really why. We are still using the same cell sizes. And there is another crucial factor adding to it. Perhaps it was even the trigger for all this. Until then, there was a certain way of measuring, a measurement technique that would establish the number of cells on a surface. It used to be 900 units per surface. And here comes Bordeaux and suddenly begins with a different measurement system. And it was quite different. The former one was a measurement system, I don't have it here right now, based on a rhombus, meaning that the cells were simply counted inside of a diamond shape. And the new measuring system was based on a simple square, where the cells on the edges were cut and all cells within the square were counted. Both measuring systems do not have anything in common, but one results in far more cells than the other.
Und die zwei Messsysteme, die haben überhaupt nichts miteinander zu tun, weil bei einem viel mehr Zellen rauskommen.
And probably the entire error was caused by this, since the foundation manufacturers were counting the cells by square centimeters, and due to the new measuring system, the cells suddenly became much larger. It may have been like this, although it doesn't matter much in the end. On here we can see a map that shows how in the warmer regions the natural cell sizes are much smaller. Here we have about 4.6 and 4.7 and even 4.5 millimeters. In the colder regions, the cell size is bigger, 5 to 5.2. Those were cell sizes Ed and Dee Lusby had found in the ancient beekeeping literature. Now here is what Ed and Dee Lusby have done. Here we see how 5.4 has 800 cells per square decimeter and 4.9 has 950, therefore we have a difference of 150 cells per square decimeter. Working with our current system, this would result in 3 frames of small cells having as many cells as 4 frames of large cells. Thus, 3 small cell frames have exactly as many cells as 4 large cell frames. This results in a much smaller breeding nest. It is much more compact and denser, and due to this it becomes much warmer.
Gut, wenn wir kleinere Zellen haben, haben wir das Nest viel kompakter, ist viel mehr zusammengedrückt. Ja? Das heißt, es wird auch wärmer werden.
Later we will see the effect of this is higher density. With more cells on each surface, the distance between the combs is also reduced. So our combs will no longer be at 37 millimeters, but at only 33 to 32, meaning that here we also get more. That it becomes even compacter. The temperature rises and the incubation time is reduced even further. Therefore, now small cells, which we are now using, we have an incubation time that is, just like with the African and Asian bees, much shorter.
4,9 Millimeter, haben wir eine Brutdauer, so wie die Biene in Asien, so wie die in Afrika, viel kürzer.
There is a beekeeper by the name Michael Bush. He has reduced the size of his bees and now he works with bees building naturally, but all the bees build small cells, all the way down to 4.6 millimeters all by themselves, 4.6 without giving them a sample. He made an experiment, and he actually has a good knowledge about this, where he bought some ordinary Italian Carnica bees, very normal, not farmed, selected for resistance or whatever, absolutely regular bees as they can be found anywhere. And he measured that when he had them on 4.95 millimeter cells, they kept the cell in 8 days after the egg had been laid, and they'd be hatching already at 19 days later.
Dann haben sie 8 Tage nach der Eiablage verdeckelt gehabt und 19 Tage danach sind sie schon geschlüpft.
So we can see that the cell size has influence on the incubation period, and this experiment proves it. My hives behave the same way, but he actually proved it.
Nur hat es wirklich ganz akkurat probiert. Gut.
Now I'll have to tell you more about the adventure of the Lusbys. It becomes even more thrilling. These 2 people were actually doing something unbelievable.
Die 2 Leute, die haben was gemacht, was man sich eigentlich überhaupt nicht vorstellen kann.
They work with 1,000 colonies in the desert of Arizona, and their hives are already on 4 or 5 frames. Incredibly powerful colonies with up to 120,000 bees per hive and even more.
120 mehr sogar Bienen pro Bienenstock, 120.000 Bienen.
This is a short film about their work.
Da ist ein kurzer Film über die Arbeit.
We'll just let it run in the background. Back in the 80s, they have also had their bees on 5.4 millimeters. Then they decided, as they had found out about smaller cells in the ancient literature, now we'll convert to small cells. At the time, it was an absolute impossible undertaking. Where would they be getting the foundations engraved with small cells? Should they do them by hand or what else? At the time, they had a friend who was an executive at the Dadan company, and they were able to convince this executive at Dadan with their arguments to make a steel roll engraved by hand to build the foundations. They moved from 5.4 to 5.05 with 1,000 beehives. That means 40,000 foundations. 40,000 in just the 2 of them. And they only worked by themselves. Or rather, at that time, they were all by themselves. Well, that is an amazing work. I've done the same, but the same with just 100 or something hives. At that time, only 50, and it's an amazing amount of work. What was the consequence? At that time, the biggest problem, or one of the biggest problems, was the tracheal mite. After they were at 5.05, the tracheal mite was no longer a problem. 0. Why? Because the bees were too small then. The bees have their tracheal openings here on the sides. Tracheal mites can only enter through the front. Then the bees were so small they could no longer come in, and the problem with the tracheal mite was all of a sudden solved at 5.05 millimeters. The Varroa problem, however, was not solved. It had improved. What did they do now? Fall rot and all the other diseases like Neosema less and less. All had improved, fewer colonies were affected. One problem was for once solved, but it was a system that didn't totally work. What they did, they reduced again. Now they went from 5.05 to 4.9 millimeters, which is half a tenth less. This is nothing. Can barely be seen. Half a tenth less. What was the success? What was the result? All diseases gone, away. 1.5 tenths. And if we talk now about these honeycombs, the ones manufactured by Moore, they are not 4.9 but a tenth bigger, and a tenth for 1.5 tenths are a world for the bees.
Das sind nicht 4,9, sondern sind ein Zehntel größer. Und ein Zehntel und 1,5 Zehntel ist eine Welt für die Bienen. Ja?
I converted my bees from 5.4 to 5.1. All made it. All, only one of 100 didn't. And then from 5.5 to 4.9 it was a pure adventure. It was really just impossible for me, and I cannot imagine how these people made it. But they've done it. And it ought to be highly appreciated. They are back on 700 colonies, the lady alone, without any type of treatment since over 25 years. And why nobody goes there to see it for himself? And all those researchers breeding for resistance, why they don't go there, where it's been done since over 25 years? Well, I don't know. I don't know it either. They don't want to. I don't know. Here you can see some photos. Meanwhile, Mr. Ed has passed away. Dee says from overwork. I think it must be so. And now she continues on her own.
Ed ist gestorben, die Dee sagt aus Überarbeitung. Ich glaube, dass es so ist. Und jetzt macht sie allein weiter.
I think the forum has been a big help for her. She has a forum of her own. I think there are now about 20,000 members or so. If you have a problem, and that is why I'm also doing the same, if you have a problem and you write it, in 2 hours you have an answer to everything. Recently described the problem we've had with a colleague, with the built wax comb, artificial wax honeycombs. In less than 2 hours I had a reply with her opinion. And I can write her now and I'll have an answer in 2 hours.
Die hat mir in 2 Stunden erklärt, was sie dazu meint. Ja, und ich kann ihr jetzt schreiben und in 2 Stunden habe ich meine Antwort.
So I want to do the same. I want to be very open and show you this is how it is done. I can show you everything, it's no problem in the forum. Also there you can learn, you write me and email and I'll reply. You write me an email and I reply. Now the question is, we are getting closer to the topic as we are still talking about the hygienic behavior, but what does this all have in common now? The question is now, within the small cell bees, where does the Varroa actually go? Does it go into the regular brood? Does it go into the drone brood? Or where is it actually going? I've had a discussion on this topic in a forum where they were trying to make a fool of me. And they kept saying, whatever you say is not true. Your brood is also infected by Varroa. I was at the very beginning then. It was when the Varroa had just arrived on our island and was only to be found in the certain places in the central part. It's called Los Llanos. My bees were already small and I took some of my strongest colonies. Yes, they were the strongest colonies I had. I'm not sure how many there were, 15 or 20, and drove there, right where the mite was first found. Because to my place it only came a year later. Then I took some bees of a friend, put them in a bucket and simply poured them in. I deliberately infected them, my best colonies, and this is a year later approximately. They had never been treated and they were deliberately infected with an incredible amount of Varroa mites. They died because at the time I had no idea about the Varroa and how to handle it. I actually let them live or die. 3 or 4 of them out of the 15 actually survived. Did nothing at all. Today not a single colony dies because we have to learn, this is a very important point. But then I did a count. I opened 100 cells of brood and found no Varroa. I couldn't believe it, so I opened another 100 and found nothing. So I continued, and as you can see here, these are the cells. This was in the very beginning. In about 100 cells of drone brood, I found about 150 or more Varroa mites. I then repeated this several times. That means within the small cell bees in the summer, the Varroa affects mostly or almost exclusively the drone brood. Why? Because it knows exactly, as the bee brood has a very short incubation period, it can't reproduce itself. So if it goes into the drone brood, where the incubation period is 3 days longer, there it can multiply. And this is exactly what the Varroa is doing in Africa and Asia. With the Apis cerana, it goes into the drone brood.
Und auch in Afrika, aber von Asien kommt sie ja in Apis cerana, da geht die vor allem in die Drohnenbrut. Gut, jetzt kommt das, was Dee sagt.
Now here's what Dee says. Dee Lusby, the lady from Arizona. Your bees, the large-celled bees, are seen by the Varroa mites as drones, so to say pseudo-drones.
Von den Varroen, von den Milben, als Pseudodrohnen angesehen. Ja? Bordeaux,
professor who enlarged the bees, had made measurements of the drone cells. They were from 5.4 millimeters up to as much as 6 plus. 5.4 he measured as a drone cell, and 5.4 is your current bee cell, right?
Und 5,4 ist eure Bienenzellengröße. Ja, das heißt,
that means the Varroa confuses the brood, and instead of going into the drone brood, it goes into the bee brood because it thinks that it's drone brood within the large-celled bees.
Bei euren Bienen, bei den großzelligen Bienen. Klar, das ist der
It is a pseudo-drone effect, as Lusby is calling it. Well, now the question rises again, what is the hygienic behavior caused by? We really only talk about the hygienic behavior, and now there are a few important things we have touched. Now Michael Bush comes again. He made another test where he had bought a queen and had put colonies of Italian Carnica bees of large cells on 4.9.
Carnica und Italienerbienen auf 4,9 auf die großen Zellen gesetzt.
No hygienic behavior. Then he placed them on small cells and all showed the hygienic behavior. So yes, the hygienic behavior has something to do with cell size. But why is it so? Why is it affecting the hygienic behavior? We've seen the incubation period, we've seen it, but how is the hygienic behavior affected by the cell size?
Das hygienische Verhalten, die Brutdauer haben wir gesehen. Aber wie kommt das hygienische Verhalten von der Zellengröße zustande?
Michael Bush used absolutely regular bees, purchased ones. None of the ones he used to work with because he already had been working with small cell bees for many years. But then he examined where it exactly comes from. Exactly what I am laying out for you now. Why there is a hygienic behavior. He said it comes from the cell size. And to find a confirmation, he bought a regular queen. He bought normal colonies and placed them on large cells, and no hygienic behavior was shown. Then he took exactly the same bees and placed them on small cells. Small cells simply means you take a small comb, completely built out, which he already had. You throw the bees on it and add the queen, and in 6 weeks you have small cell bees.
Schmeißt deine Bienen drauf, durch die Könige dazu, und in 6 Wochen hast du kleine Bienen.
What I want to explain is you can take every kind of bee, every and each kind will show hygienic behavior on small cells.
Jede. Und jede wird das hygienische Verhalten zeigen auf kleinen Zellen.
You do, of course, need to develop it further. In the case that this would be inheritable, or that it could have been done through selective breeding, 30 years of resistance breeding would have had much more success to show. They have been doing it for 30 years, and he made a test by taking just ordinary bees, as if you would have taken your bees. You can take your bees and throw them on a small cell, and they will show the hygienic behavior.
Dann hätte 30 Jahre Resistenzzucht viel mehr Erfolg zeigen müssen. Die machen das doch 30 Jahre. Ja? Auch. Er hat einen Versuch gemacht und hat einfach ganz normale Bienen genommen. Er hat jetzt deine Bienen genommen. Du kannst deine Bienen nehmen, schmeißt sie auf kleine Zellen und die zeigen das hygienische Verhalten.
Well, and now we are reaching the core of the discussion of all this we are doing, colony strength, right?
Genau an, was es eigentlich geht. Und das ist eigentlich der Kern von der ganzen Diskussion, was wir jetzt machen. Volksstärke, ja?
Does the hygienic behavior have anything to do with cell size? That's the big question. Dee Lusby says, and this is a woman with the most experience of us all, she says she has been working with resistant bees for over 25 years. She says there is a hierarchy in the hive. There are very important issues and there are less important issues. You can say the most important issues are those related to the brood. The bees, our bees, never leave the brood behind. The African bees do, but ours always stay at the brood nest. You can do whatever you want. African bees leave the brood behind if they have to. It is also important to get pollen, and it is also very important to get nectar. These are very important things, and the hygienic behavior is quite far down. Why? I don't know why. It also tends to appear far too late amongst those colonies that are dying. This means the hygienic behavior comes all the way on the end for the bees, as they do not give it so much importance because in their genetically transmitted experience it's not so important to defend themselves.
Und in ihrer Genetik gespeichert ist, dass sie nicht, ist nicht so wichtig, dass man sie verteidigt. Ja,
as we now brought the Varroa and increased the cell size, the Varroa multiplies immensely, while the bees doesn't have a reason to defend itself because it simply hasn't learned to do so.
Die Varroa vermehrt sie wahnsinnig stark. Ja, und die Biene hat keinen Trigger, das heißt kein Auslöser, dass sie sich wehrt. Das hat sie einfach nicht gelernt. Ja, gut.
Dee Lusby says the hygienic behavior depends on the number of bees available to do all the work.
Auftreten des hygienischen Verhaltens ist abhängig von der Anzahl der Bienen für die vorhandene Arbeit.
So if I have a more compact brood nest within the small cells, there are a lot less bees needed in order to maintain the brood nest, to maintain the temperature and to feed them because they are so small. There are needed fewer bees. That means there are more bees left to do the other work.
Weil die ja kleiner sind, brauche ich weniger Bienen. Das heißt, ich habe mehr Bienen übrig für andere Arbeiten.
It's very important that we understand that everything is more compact in the small-celled bees.
Bei den kleinzelligen Bienen, dadurch, dass
there are a lot less bees necessary to do the same work.
Für die gleiche Arbeit.
Previously, we've seen Fernando Catalayud, and he says that those bees treated with chemicals live for far less time. Far less. Not only a little, but much less. Not for 6 weeks, but 5 weeks or even 4 weeks.
Viel weniger lang leben. Viel weniger. Ja, nicht bloß weniger, sondern viel weniger. Das sind nicht 6 Wochen, sondern das sind 5 Wochen oder 4 Wochen. Ja,
lifespan is very reduced. The bees under treatment with stress have a much shorter life. The small-celled bees live longer as there are too many bees for the necessary work.
Ja, also die Biene mit Behandlung, mit Stress leben viel kürzer. Die kleinzelligen Bienen, dadurch, dass es zu viele Bienen gibt, viel zu viele Bienen für die nötige Arbeit, leben länger.
Just done a test where I've been marking hatching bees with a gel pen. It's a marker used to tag queens by painting a white dot on their back.
Bienen, die schlüpfen, weiß markiert mit einem weißen Filzstift. Da gibt es so einen Filzstift, wo man Königin markiert, ein spezieller Filzstift. Einfach.
After 8 weeks, I could still see white bees. Then I gave up because I didn't have that much time. But after 8 weeks, they were still alive. Dee says they can live up to 12 weeks. I don't know it, but they live 10 weeks, 12 weeks, the double lifespan. Is that possible? But being so, it would explain a lot of things, right?
Damit erklären wir aber, wenn das wirklich so wäre, erklären wir viele Sachen. Ja? Gehen wir mal von aus,
so let's assume they only live 2 weeks longer, which is what I saw.
Wenn die also länger leben,
when living so long, it would mean the whole cycle is affected. There would suddenly be more and more bees, and there would always be a surplus of bees. And if we have a surplus of bees, then there will suddenly come the moment when they'll behave hygienically. And this is the reason why the hygienic behavior actually occurs, because due to the small cell, there are more bees for the same amount of work, nothing else. It's just that the shorter incubation time depends on the different cell size. And the extended lifetime is a result of their less stressed life. As the bee is not stressed, the bee lives for 6 months in the winter. Why does it live for half a year? Because it doesn't have to constantly work itself to death.
Die Biene ist nicht gestresst. Die Biene lebt doch ein halbes Jahr im Winter. Warum lebt die ein halbes Jahr? Weil sie nicht dauernd bis zu Tod arbeiten muss. Ja? Und wenn ihr jetzt weniger Stress macht,
and why isn't the bee stressed? Because there are a lot more bees for the same amount of work.
Wenn wir ausgehen davon, 4 Zargen, große Zellen sind so viele Zellen wie 3 Zargen.
We assume 4 frames of large cells contain as many as 3 frames of small cells. It means that there are a third more bees available. Okay, now let's assume each brood cycle is of 21 days, or in this case 19 days. There is always a third more and it multiplies, so as the colonies can actually suddenly become incredibly big.
Und ich habe es ausprobiert, ich hab das alles nicht geglaubt. Gell? Ich habe es ausprobiert und habe dann wirklich Stöcke einfach groß werden lassen, 5 Zargen. Und die sind über den Winter mit 5 Zargen gegangen.
I didn't believe all this until I tried it myself, and then I simply left the colonies to grow larger and larger, and they came through the winter with 5 frames. You wouldn't believe it. And honey frames, a frame full of honey in it, and I left the sides full of honey, and they made it over the winter well, better than ever. And it looks like nothing could ever harm them, because they were so fit and so strong.
Du musst sehen, du musst hinkommen und musst anschauen, weil sonst glaubst du es nicht. Die in Arizona, das ist so wie hier. Ja, so wie hier. Die haben Wüste von Arizona.
In Arizona, it's like here, just like here. There is a desert, the desert of Arizona. It's a mountain range at 2,500 meters height, and they have minus 15 to 20 degrees in the winter, and in summer about 40 to 45 degrees. So it's even extremer than here. You should simply come to see it for yourself. You won't believe it, but that's how it is. I'm there and it feels like nothing could harm them. My bees fly continuously the whole year round.
Das ist so. Die Bienen stehen da und du meinst, denen kann nichts was ausmachen. Wie viel? Ich habe es gerade gesagt.
But the black bee stops breeding from the end of November until Christmas. They do not breed throughout like the Italians. The Italians always have 5 brood comes, they stop with the brood and then it starts off again. Last year was a good honey year, and I've left a lot of honey in there. This year we have problems with drought. Within some of the colonies I've taken out 60 kilos and left 60 kilos inside.
Letztes Jahr war ein gutes Honigjahr und da habe ich wahnsinnig viel Honig draufgelassen. Heute haben wir ganz riesen Probleme mit Trockenheit. Ich habe Völker, wo ich 60 Kilo rausgenommen habe.
And when they start, they don't care at all about what's the weather or whatever else. They just start to breed and go on and on. They simply don't care as they have plenty, and that's what the ancient way of beekeeping was about. Dee Lusby in Arizona has said so before. This is the way they used to do it in former times. They always had problems with the weather and they simply had to survive for a year.
Probleme gehabt haben im Wetter, ja, und die haben einfach ein Jahr überleben müssen.
We're talking about small cell bees. I can't share my experience on anything other than small cell bees. I can only say that this is completely different behavior of the bees. It is completely different, right? And if you'd like to get started with this system, then please do start slowly. And if you have 10 colonies, do not convert all 10 colonies at the same time, but start off with 2. Look for a place far away and start learning. Because the bees know it. You'll need to learn it. We have no idea on how the We have no idea on how we need to treat bees that have to defend themselves against the Varroa. Therefore, you need to learn to see the signs of when the bees tell you, "Whoa, now I have to do something." But you won't see it because no one should let it come that far as having to do something. That's what you need to learn. I learned, and now I'm going to the colonies and say, "Wow, I have to do something, otherwise I won't make it." And you wouldn't probably see it. You'd see it after 4 weeks and then it's too late. There is no other solution. That's the trick. You'll have to learn, and together with the people and our cooperation, we have developed a system so that anyone can do it. And there is an established concept where everyone is working with offshoots in the beginning. No problem at all. You'll make it and you'll get your bees, even if there are other bees around, into a state which is much better than what your bees are now. Someday you'll get to a point where you won't have to do it any longer, because you might even be able to convince all the other colleagues around you, and in any case this way is a much better way of beekeeping than in the large cell, because the large cell is clearly artificial. Well, now the question is, if we continue doing this and keep selecting, if we basically combine both ways, the smaller cells are there and we keep selecting all the time. I've been selecting for over 10 years and I'm breeding queens. My criteria of choice are simply that they clean out the brood, that they know how to build small cells well, and so on. Then we'll suddenly also start seeing the hygienic behavior within the drone brood. They suddenly start cleaning the drone brood as well. It means through breeding we reach so far that we can say, okay, now we have no longer a problem with Varroa. It will be like with the Apis cerana, where it is not a permanent problem. When does this occur? This occurs when they have the least work, clearly. The Varroa are always there. They're always there, but it always remains below the threshold where the bee begins to... I'll tell you what happened to me in a moment, but one more thing. When does the hygienic behavior step in? When do we see many cells cleaned out? It's especially in spring and autumn, when it doesn't occur mainly in... And why does it occur mainly in autumn and spring? Because they simply have more time. Then, when the summer comes, or when the blossom comes, they have to breed, make honey and more honey. They have no time to do it, but in spring, when there is no drones, right? Then the Varroa goes into the regular brood, as there is no other choice, and that is when they start, because they can't allow that. The problem with the virus of deformed wings arises then. If throughout that time too many enter the bee brood, then suddenly the virus of the deformed wings appears, and once you see 5 bees with deformed wings while receiving a colony, it's over. Absolutely over. You'll have to do something because they'll die. When you see 5 within the small-celled bees, I do not know how it's with the large-celled bees, but it might be worse. But then you have to do something. What you can do then is an advanced topic. But in any case, it occurs in autumn and spring because there is no drone brood. Then they clean out here and it goes on. Last year, with one of my groups of several big colonies, 25, I was going through, as I do every month. I see every hive about once a month. I had a look and I saw loads of bees with deformed wings laying in front of the colonies.
Bin ich an den Stand gegangen und das waren hervorragende Stöcke, große Stöcke, 25.
So what's happening now? I wasn't too nervous because I knew the bees. They were doing well and they knew how to do it. But I saw the deformed wings, bees with deformed wings laying outside the hive. Well, so I opened the hives and I had a look inside, and there was nothing, not a single deformed wing. They'd thrown them all out. A week later I came back to see what happened, and in front of all 25 hives they were laying heaps and heaps of brood larvae.
Aber ich sehe die deformierten Flügel da draußen. Bienen mit deformierten Flügeln. Gut. Stöcke aufgemacht, durchschaut. Innen drin gar nichts. Ja, keine einzige deformierte Flügel. Das heißt, die haben die alle rausgeschmissen. Gut. Eine Woche später gehe ich hin und schaue, was ist jetzt.
That means they suddenly started seeing the Varroa as a threat and began evicting it, throwing out all the infected brood. Right in front of the hives, real heaps. I photographed it. There are real heaps of larvae. A week later I went back, and it was all over. Everything was over. And everything all at once. That means within a group of colonies there is an energy. So if one starts doing it, they'll all start.
Hab vor den Stöcken, also richtige Haufenweise, ich habe es fotografiert, das waren richtige Haufen, richtig so hoch, weiße Larven.
And it wasn't like only colony number 1 or 17 or 28. They were doing it, but suddenly they were all seeing it. There was a problem and they got started.
Am Bienenstand Energie, ja? Also wenn einer anfängt, fangen alle an. War mir auch neu. Ja, ist nicht bloß so, dass es jetzt auf Stock Nummer 1 oder 17 und 28 das macht, sondern plötzlich setzen alle ein. Ja? Die sehen, dass irgendein Problem ist. Boom, jetzt geht's los.
And recently I uploaded the photos of when a group of 40 beekeepers came to see me and we opened the colonies without any wheel or any kind of protection. And not a single person got stung. Out of 40 people, not a single one.
Wie du gesagt hast, die sind absolut heiß. Und da haben wir aufgemacht und nichts und keinen hat was gestochen. Also von 40 hat keinen gestochen. War schon gut. Gut.
Well, the subject has actually been covered now. This is all there is. I still have a small film. This is totally advanced. Those are people in Finland. They made the video and they worked with small cells. And this is the absolute icing of the cake.
In Finnland, von denen kommt das Video. Und das sind dann kleine Zellen. Und das ist dann das i-Tüpfelchen. Da hat der Imker, nimmt ein Varroa in der Pizette.
The beekeeper takes a Varroa with some pincers and places it on the entrance of the hive.
Legt sie aufs Flugbrett. Da ist sie.
They rush out and now has the Varroa in his mouth.
Die hat jetzt im Maul, die Varroa.
That means they do not even allow it to enter. If a bee comes with a Varroa on its body, it can no longer come inside. I only wanted you to see this because what I've been talking about is simply my experience with hygienic behavior. But this shows there are many other ways for the bees to develop their defense against the Varroa even further.
Ganz viele andere Möglichkeiten, wie sie die Biene gegen die Varroen wehren kann. Jetzt ist sie ausgekommen. Ich glaube,
now it came out. I think that's it. Now she's flying. Here it was again. Now I simply say, why are you not seeing this? Because you are treating, and if you are treating something like this, it doesn't show. It can only appear if you don't apply any treatment. So no one wants to say it. No one wants to say, I don't treat. Although no one wants to say, I don't do treatments because it can't be said. But if you treat, the load is always taken off the bees. We treat and actually never show the bees how to do it by themselves. And if we'll apply even stronger chemicals, it won't work at all anymore.
Kräftigen Mitteln